Oh, we got more people coming in. Awesome. Everybody, thank you so much for being here. As you know, this marks the last night of this class's iteration. We will be in touch soon for when the next will be. And we'll do this again and continue the conversation. So as always, we invite you to listen well, to listen with hearts that are ready to learn, listen with spirits that are ready to be moved, listen with minds that are ready to be challenged and to grow this evening. And so find yourself entering into a space of prayer. I'll read our questions and open us with prayer, then I'll introduce our guest tonight. Do you accept the freedom and power God gives you to resist evil, injustice, and oppression in whatever forms they present themselves? Do you confess Jesus Christ as your Savior, put your whole trust in His grace, and promise to serve Him as your Lord in union with the church which Christ has opened to people of all ages, nations, and races? Gracious God, we give you thanks for this opportunity, for this journey that these folks have been on for these past 5 weeks. We pray that this journey is just a continued walk on the path for justice, and a walk on the path as we all become more anti-racist every single day in our close walk with you. So guide us in conversation. May the scales fall from our eyes. May our hearts be softened even more this evening. May our ears become unplugged so that we are ever aware of what you are doing within us for transformation in this world. In your Son's precious name we pray. Amen. Well, friends, we have an incredible guest tonight with us. We have Jonathan Wilson-Hartgrove. Jonathan has been to our church a few times. He is an author. One of his latest books, Reconstructing the Gospel, Finding Freedom from Slaveholder Religion. He's come and had a conversation with us around that. He's also had a conversation with us around his book, Revolution of Values, Reclaiming Public Faith for the Common Good. He's written many other things. He's very much active in the Poor People's Campaign, and also works with an incredible ministry in Durham called the School of Conversion that just does incredible work within the prison system and reentry and all the things that are involved with that. So Jonathan, thank you so much for being with us. Thank you so much for guiding us in conversation this evening. Tonight we're going to be talking about next steps. You guys have been doing this, many of you for these 5 weeks, many of you for longer than 5 weeks. Perhaps this is the beginning of your first 5-week iteration of figuring out what to do and how to continue the momentum into the space that we are called to be a part of. So Jonathan, welcome.
Well, thank you so much. It's good to be here and a delight to see many familiar faces on this screen. And I remember fondly times I've had with you. It's a strange world we're living in where this is how we get to be together, but we'll take what we can get. And I'm glad to learn about this this study that you've been in together. Maybe I'll just say, as a sort of a preface to our conversation, since I've learned a little bit about what y'all have been talking about, is that you're not alone. There are a lot of churches having this conversation right now. I'm actually in the middle of it with 650 evangelical congregations around the country right now, with my sister Brenda Salter McNeil, who's out on the West Coast, and Pittsburgh Theological Seminary convened these evangelical congregations who want to take seriously the way race has shaped our understanding of the gospel and our practice of living out the faith. Sometimes that has seemed like a conversation that our evangelical sisters and brothers weren't as eager to have. But at least since this summer, there's been some more openness to that. I was just earlier today with the National Council of Churches for their National Unity Gathering, and Shaniqua Walker Barnes and I were having this conversation with pastoral leaders, brought together under the umbrella of that ecumenical organization across the country. So I guess I would say that this is a 400-year issue that the church hasn't done enough to address. And so we might be a little late, but I am glad that we're at least working on it. And I'm eager to hear where y'all are on the conversation. So yeah, let's open it up. Either where y'all are. I know Britt and Nathan had some ideas, or if others want to jump in, I'll let you set the structure here.
Sure thing. So Britt, go ahead and lead us with your question and thought you had today.
Oh, well, we were just sort of talking about what we covered today. And I think we're all on a path of sorts. I think this is a lifelong journey. So, but we all might be on different spots. And I think most of us are well past the starting point. But at the same point, we were talking about how you have evolved, not only, just your spiritual life, but in your anti-racist and living into the Rutba house, and that your life has taken you definitely a lot farther down the path than most of us who live in our, our safe kind of white communities. And we're just discussing what's between here and there. And when we're, I think we're probably on the same place you were when you were 14 years old. Because you're first.
Well, I don't know. I'm not sure the path is linear. I appreciate the spiritual that says we are climbing Jacob's ladder, which sounds like a linear progression, but then it says every round goes higher, higher. So I'm not sure it's a straight line, but I do believe that we can make progress, and that indeed all of the Christian life is about going further up and deeper in, and growing into the fullness of Him who fills everything, as Ephesians says. That's a bigness that we'll never entirely inhabit, but that I think gives us space, all of us, to do the work that's before us. So yeah, I'm most interested, whoever I talk to, wherever folks find themselves on the journey, I'm most interested in what challenge you see most pressing right before you in this moment. What has this conversation around what it means to follow Jesus into an anti-racist witness in the world? What's that led you to? Because I think it's a conversation that lots of people have, but it's a distinct conversation for Christians, in no small part because in our context, our 400-year story that we share in this place that's called America, the church has not only been deeply involved in the systems that have reinforced and perpetuated racism, but in many ways the church, or Christianity as a way of naming and describing the world, has served as a host body for white supremacy. My teacher and mentor, Willie Jennings, talks about white supremacy as parasitic on Christianity, right? Christianity is a true and good witness to, the love that moves the sun and other stars. But our tradition teaches us that all evil is parasitic on the good, right? Any evil thing that happens in this world has to work through something that's good. And white supremacy in America worked through the church. You can trace this all the way back to the very beginning. So I wonder, given your own Christian journey thus far, and your efforts to focus on the challenge of embodying an anti-racist gospel, what are the challenges that you see before you in terms of your individual life and witness, in terms of our collective life and witness?
Jonathan, this is John Clarkson.
Good to see you, John.
Good to see you again. We appreciate you being.
John came, sat on my porch one time and brought a bunch of ice cream. Everybody here remembers your ice cream, John.
Probably still there.
No, we ate it all.
I think one of our challenges is, I think first we have to provoke ourselves out of our comfort zone, which I think we're in the process of doing that. But then to extend that beyond ourselves and a relatively small group of people to the larger congregation. And I'm wondering how you're interacting with the evangelicals who, at least, and maybe I'm wrong, but from my viewpoint, they have a very limited focus on what they think is important, such that they ignore a lot of the teachings of Jesus to emphasize one or two ideas. And I would say one of them is being pro-birth, not pro-life.
Yeah.
Pro-birth. So I'm interested to know what you've encountered, because I think a challenge for us, and as you know, we've been at this with you for several years, how we want to make more progress with our own congregation. And I think that involves getting people out of their comfort zone, having them understand the difference between being racist and anti-racist and not somewhere in the middle, which should be non-existent.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. I think it's a really important question. It helps me. My friend Shaniqua Walker Barnes, who I've been working on this stuff with in terms of congregations, she's a clinical psychologist and understands very much how the habits of white supremacy are carried in our bodies, right? There's a whole field of somatic psychology that's about how we embody what we have experienced, and in many ways, some of you may have worked through this. I know I've had to work through some of my own stuff. That trauma in our lives can continue to be carried in our bodies, even when we don't consciously think about it or are not aware of it. I think in a similar way, Shaniqua says that collectively we have to deal with the way that white supremacy has shaped our institutions and our assumptions and norms in our culture, and I think that's definitely something that the church has to deal with, and part of the challenge becomes not just sort of how do we talk about these things and sort of try to do what's right, but how do we invite people into places where they can learn new habits. And I really believe that one of the most important things that happens in a congregational life that has been shaped by whiteness is for that group of people who have all kinds of norms and expectations about, what church is here, what worship is here, what discipleship is, what missions is. All of us have long traditions of how we've thought about this. And once a congregation recognizes that those things and our understandings of those things, the patterns of those things are also shaped by whiteness, a congregation that can obviously not, blow it up and change everything, but that can find ways to interrupt that and to let people and issues and concerns beyond the congregation interrupt that, I think becomes critical for shifting the culture of a congregation. So sometimes it's as simple as finding one issue or one campaign or movement in your place, in your neighborhood, or in your city that that matters a lot to your Black sisters and brothers. Maybe it's in a sister church, or maybe it's through some advocacy organization that you're in touch with. But to let that concern and that that cry that's grown up out of a different experience, to find a way to let that interrupt the normal patterns and practices of your internal culture, I think that can be hugely important. And it can begin to kind of crack us open, right? To see and to feel the concern that we've been shut off from, really by a generational hardening of our hearts. I think that's what we have to deal with in terms of what we carry in our bodies, if we're, if we're honest about the fact that we've inherited a long story of white supremacy.
Tom Murdoch, you had a question? Thank you, Jonathan.
As more of a comment, I'm interested in how you view church encouraging its church members to get involved in the legislative process to affect issues that affect the poor and the disadvantaged. For example, today, I just read and I responded to it that the Board of Education is going to vote on changing one of the schools' name from Vance to Granger, because the current name references a slaveholder and so forth.
Yeah.
And it would be great from my perspective if 500 people from Myers Park would write to their member of the Board of Education to make it happen. But I don't see that that's anything that's been discussed here except by me in these meetings. But I just think, like with a lot of things like Medicaid expansion in North Carolina, 500,000 are without Medicaid, and 1,000 die each year. And we could be writing to our congressmen or our General Assembly, senators and representatives to help make that happen. But I don't see that there's any groundswell for that. And I just wonder how you feel you see in other churches and so forth.
Yeah, so thank you. So this is an important realm of concerns that you raise, which is political engagement, right? One of the habits of whiteness that I think the church has accepted and passed on is a separation of the gospel message from politics. It would be
join the audio.
It would be very difficult to read the New Testament, to read the Gospels, and to argue that what Jesus does and says in the first century isn't political. Jesus proclaims a kingdom. Jesus comes into Jerusalem, in a triumphal entry, which is essentially a parade that Roman soldiers had when they were victorious in battle. It was a very political movement. You only got crucified in first century Rome for being a political subversive. So Jesus is political, but whiteness in the American context really tried to separate our faith, our individual relationship with God, and often our life together as a congregation from politics. So what you're saying is a really important issue, right? If a congregation is going to be serious about an anti-racist gospel, it has to be a political gospel. The only question is, what kind of politics, and how do we find our way into anti-racist politics? It's certainly not as simple as any sort of partisan alliances. And so I think it's often, especially for congregations that have been shaped by white culture, it's often critically important to follow the leadership of directly impacted people in terms of political engagement, right? So if the issue is renaming a school, my first question would be, who wants that school to be renamed? Or maybe in terms of even identifying the issues, I think the role of the church is very much to try to attune our ear to what God hears, right? And we read in Exodus, God says, "I have heard the cries of my people in bondage." So who is in bondage and who is crying out? I mean, when we just listen, in our society, in our community, in the streets, there are certainly people crying out for healthcare coverage. I think that's one where we can come alongside movements that are trying to lift up that need. There's a huge need for living wages. One of the reasons I have worked with the Poor People's Campaign over the past several years is I just came to realize, mostly through knowing neighbors in this place where I live, that a lot of people who work more than full time don't make enough money to actually live in our society. We found when we did a national survey that 140 million people in the United States right now are either poor or low income, which means that they're one emergency away from poverty. And as we all know, many people in this year have had unexpected emergencies or losses of employment. It was an interesting statistic I saw the other day. Unemployment for people who make over $40 an hour has almost gone away, since the summer. But for folks who make less than $14 an hour, it's still over 20% in the country, because so many of the service jobs that are connected to food and hospitality and other things simply aren't happening right now. And so I would say, in terms of trying to shape an anti-racist political witness as a congregation, particularly when we know that we're a congregation that has largely been shaped by whiteness and the norms of whiteness, is to really find those people in the community who are crying out and listen to what their demands are and ask how a congregation can stand alongside those demands. I mean, it would indeed be a powerful thing, if there were a community of people who, because of, for example, property values, are advocating for their school to get the funding that's needed to make sure that they have adequate classroom space or adequate, teachers in the classroom, or, at this time, as we're thinking about going back to school, adequate accommodations for public health precautions. It would be a powerful thing if 500 people showed up from your church to petition the board to not do something that sort of, you thought up or initiated, but to say, we're here to say that these neighbors who are crying out for justice are our sisters and brothers, and we want what they're asking to be fulfilled. So I think that's a critical question for the shaping the politics of a church that's trying to be anti-racist. Who are we listening to, and how do we hear the voices of those that God hears?
Good. Thank you. A question came in earlier. It says, do you think we as the church spend enough time naming and confessing our part of systemic racism?
Well, no, or we wouldn't be involved in it. I remember Karl Barth said, we only confess sin on the way out. He was making the point that, once you can see something clearly enough to say that it's sin, and in confessing it, admit that you want, that it's not God's will, then you're already at least beginning the work of turning away from it. The trouble with white supremacy in the United States and in so much of the world, this is why, the church as kind of host body for the virus is such a dangerous thing. The great trouble with it is that we use faith to justify it. And we have developed ways of talking about God and talking about our relationship with God that either ignores the worst injustices or explains them away as somehow, the result of God's will. That's certainly the case if you go back to the 18th and 19th century in terms of the people who defended slavery. That's what I've called slaveholder religion, but it's all very much still with us. I mean, in the 20th century, there was a very concerted and very well-funded effort to ally Christianity with free market capitalism. Sometimes it's called Christian libertarianism, and this was a very bipartisan thing. There were, Democrats and Republicans involved in it, but it was all about sort of crafting a narrative that says that God blesses those who do what's right, and so if you're doing okay in this society, then you're probably in line with God. And if you're poor or struggling, then it's probably your fault. It's some sin that you've committed. And of course, that developed in the late 20th century and into this century into a kind of division of the world into, the deserving and the undeserving poor. You've probably heard these sort of things, that there are some people who who should get a sort of hand up because they don't deserve the situation they're in. But there are a lot of people out there who, you give them an inch, they'll take a mile. They've tried to work the system. We have these narratives that have been spun over and over again, and what they end up doing is they end up justifying the extreme inequality that exists as if it's somehow a result of what God wants. And so, so confession is the practice whereby we try to see clearly, right? Not only what's wrong, but our own entanglement in it. And in naming that, we recommit ourselves over and over and over again to finding a way out. I mean, that's why we're exhorted to confess our sins every day. Because, I mean, part of being blind to, or unaware of the, full extent of what it means that that my own life and faith and being is entangled with this long history of justifying what's wrong, is that I don't know all the ways that, my habits and assumptions and, things that I do without thinking about it reinforces a system and a way of being that hurts other people. So, we practice and examine, right? I mean, I don't know how it works for you, but one way, the way Ignatius said you do it is when you lay down to say your prayers at night, you go back through the day. You think about, in this day, can I see places where I was lining up with God's will, places where it was clear to me that I was out of line with what God wants for me and for the world, and what can I do to change those things so that tomorrow I might better fully participate in the life of God in the world. I think that kind of confession is necessary. It's helped me a lot to live and work and understand myself both, you know, alongside and understand myself as an addict. You know, every addict will tell you that recovery is a lifelong journey, you know, one day at a time. Uh, if you made it through yesterday, that's no guarantee that you're going to stay sober tomorrow, but it's one step, you know, one step further towards sobriety. And so part of unlearning whiteness is recognizing that, you know, whiteness has taught us to be addicted to control, taught us to be addicted to power. It's taught us to be addicted to believing that the way we see the world is sort of the only way, you know, that it either is seen or should be seen. And it's a lifelong journey to recover from that addiction. But it's also freeing, right? To know that you can be free from that, and to know that that there is a life that's fuller and richer. I think it's a powerful thing, and to open ourselves to the gifts that that other people bring and other cultures. You know, one powerful thing that often happens in kind of anti-racist trainings or racial equity trainings is people are invited to caucus with other folks who've been raised the same way they are, and to talk about the gifts of their culture. You do this in a room full of white folks, black folks, Latino folks, and then you come back together and say, you know, black folks can talk all day long about what they love about being black. You know, Latino folks talk all day long about how they enjoyed their fiestas and their family gatherings and their tamales, and then you get to the white folks and people look at each other awkwardly, you know. What do we like about being white? The wages of whiteness is that you don't have to think about being white, but you of course lose all of that richness and identity that's kind of pushed to the margins by a culture that claims supremacy and forces everyone to conform to it. You know.
Hey, Jonathan, it's Ron Knapp.
Hello, Ron. Good to see you.
Hey, good to see you. Welcome. I may be jumping the line, Nathan and Britt. I apologize. My chat room maneuvering is not very delicate. Jonathan, so you have such deep and wide ties to the Black community. I realize it's not monolithic, but given all the years and all the work you've done, what's your sense for their sense of what a lot of the anti-racist, you know, there's a lot of noise going on. Everybody's talking anti-racist. Do you get a sense that they feel, whomever you've talked to, that there's really something happening here that's going to bring real change? It's genuine, it's heartfelt, it's not going to be check it off and we'll get back to business?
Well, I don't know a Black person who was not encouraged to see millions of white people marching and making other public demonstrations this summer to say Black Lives Matter. Of course, Black folks know that their lives matter in a world where they have so often faced, you know, the institutions and systems that that act like their lives don't matter. So it's no news to them, by and large, that something needs to change. But it is encouraging to see people who don't usually show up to say these things and to try to do something about it, doing that. So I have heard widespread encouragement of just the very work that you all are doing, and that you're doing it yourselves, right? I mean, one of the things that's most burdensome on our black sisters and brothers is that often when white folks come to the realization that, a country that stole people and stole their labor, and then, after that, told them that they needed to live in separate and unequal conditions for 100 years. And then after that said, well, what's a little segregation and slavery between friends? Let's move on. It's not news that we haven't addressed this fully. And so, the black folks who have seen white folks who want to grapple with this, the hardest thing for them is often that they're, white folks that they have any kind of relationship with, because they've worked together, or they're, on a team together, or they sit on a, board or council together, are so often kind of cornered and asked then by the white folks who've all of a sudden realized something is wrong. Can you tell me, what I need to do to change? And, it almost becomes like, another job we need to do is sort of, help you figure out how to, black folks told me over the, how would I know how to tell you to, get over whiteness? I've spent my whole life trying to survive whiteness. I'm not going to help you get over it. So anyway, all that to say, I think people are very glad that there's a conversation happening about systemic racism. I think they're encouraged to see white folks who want to do the work. And I think a lot of black folks are reasonably skeptical that, white people who have put a sign in their yard or joined a march are really going to do the long and difficult work of changing the systems. And frankly, folks are skeptical because they've seen, older folks especially, have seen us go through some cycles of this before. And, at the end of the day, I think black folks often have realized that the burden they have carried in this country is not only that they've had to survive and figure out how their children and loved ones can survive, but that they have also been responsible for saving this democracy over and over again. And I think people can grow weary of that. Here we are, just before an election. I don't need to tell you it's a critical election, but just think about the number of times when critical issues have been on the line, and black women, in terms of the proportionality of carrying the weight, have been the people who've shown up, who've gotten out, who've turned out people who have pushed things over the line. In some ways, I think the most important thing that white folks could do is to try to pattern their practices after black women. Like I'm in a lot of trainings right now for voter turnout. Like there is not a voter turnout training in this country that can teach you, over the next, how many ever days we have now, 27 days, to turn out as many people as the average black woman does. So in some ways, I just say to white folks, like, just try to be half as good as the black woman, that best. And that's a pretty good standard to measure by on a lot of things. Yeah.
Yep.
Jonathan, let me ask you this. So a couple of things while everybody's here. My Wednesday Bible study, one of the things I've tried to do is have different voices. So women's voices, Jewish voices, thinking about the New Testament.
Yeah.
Black voices. That's helpful. So I've got a guy in 9 days named Esau McCauley. Actually got hot onto this because Wendy Wallace-Wright, who's on this call tonight, her husband Royster had read this book and said, like, you need to dig into this thing. And I knew about it, but I read it and I was really blown away by it. So Esau McCauley is a Black Anglican, and his book it's just amazing. Like at every page, I was circling things, underlining things.
Yeah.
He's just got a way of putting stuff where he's not blaming white people for being white, but he's saying, here's how Black people understand these passages. And it might be the Christmas passages, whatever it is. He's so good at that. I hope you all will tune in on that and share it with other people. Like he asks questions like, Jesus could criticize Herod, who was the power of the day. Why can't we criticize the power in the White House today? Like, that's a good question. He asked this question. I love this. I'd never thought about this before, and I've spent a lot of time on all this, is that most sins, we understand they're nagging sins that won't go away, like greed, materialism, lust. You have to constantly battle against these. For some reason with racism, people think like, that's either has gone away or it's going to go away one day. But it's actually something that's going to nag us forever. So I hope you'll tune in from a program with Esau McCauley. But one of the things that he and I talked about is that so I'm interested in you guys that are in the room, and I'm glad that you're here. But I'm interested in the people who would never tune in to this program because it's an anti-racism program. And so Jonathan, you talk about what the church will do. It's hard. When I had a little 100-member church, it was easy to get the church to do something. We got 5,000 people, and they're all over the ballpark. And so I'm interested in the people who wouldn't join in this conversation. And one of the things that they often say to me is, one, I'm not racist, like it's an either or. And I'm not the either, I'm the or. I'm not racist. But then also they point to the tremendous progress that has been made. They say, when I was growing up in the 50s, there were lynchings, whatever. And we've made so much progress. Why don't we celebrate the progress that we've made instead of talking about the problems that we still face? How would you, I get this almost daily, how would you speak to such people who'd say, and they're good people, they're lovely people, they're beautiful people, but they say, I'm not anti-racist, and we made so much progress. Why can't we just celebrate that?
Well, we can celebrate progress, and we do and should. But when people are crying out for life, it really doesn't help, George Floyd saying, I can't breathe. It doesn't help to say, at least you didn't have to live under Jim Crow signs, right? I mean, that's not the burden on his body. And for so many people, the burden on their body is the current manifestations of, mass incarceration, of the stigmatization of communities, the way in which, children haven't had access to good schools or to clean water because of where they live. And I think a lot of folks who say, why can't we just celebrate how far we've come? As I've talked to people in that situation, I've come to realize, like, they don't really realize the level of inequality that we're living with in this country. I mean, here's one way of measuring it. The disparity between the median income of Black folks and white folks in 1965 was less than it is today in 2020. I don't think most folks realize that, right? That, the sort of the wealth gap between Black folks and white folks. You say, well, we got rid of at least legally segregated schools. We see Black people, successful on TV, in business, in politics. It feels like, and I get that, like it can feel like to people that we're not a segregated society, and therefore, we must be an equal society. But as a matter of fact, when it comes down to the wealth that people have access to, there's actually more disparity now than there was when we made those changes in the mid-1960s. So I think a part of the challenge is to, and this is always a challenge for facing the truth of the world around us, is that as Adenauer says, it's a condition of truth is that suffering must speak, right? If we haven't heard the cries of those who are suffering, then it's hard to even have a honest assessment of what's happening in the world around us. And so in my own life and work, I've tried to invite folks like that into situations where they can see and know someone who is living a different reality.
So Jonathan, you've made mention in each of your answers to these questions in some form or fashion, this getting to know somebody. And it's something that you write so wonderfully about. And yeah, be elementary with us in this space. Talk about the ways you get to know people. I had as John alluded to earlier, we had the privilege of just eating ice cream on your back porch one afternoon. And that was a place that you got to know us. We got to know you deeper than we had before. What are some other ways that you get to know people? But then you take it, you always do such a beautiful job. You take it beyond just getting to know someone. So speak into that if you don't mind.
Well, I mean, people are endlessly fascinating. And I mean, I imagine we all get to know people in different ways. I don't, I don't think I'm unique in that way, but I do think there's a difference between just sort of, knowing someone, knowing their story, sort of, encountering another person as a person, and asking how the, reality of someone's life affects the way we see the world. And that's what I've been talking about in terms of hearing the cries of people. What I'm talking about is not incredibly complicated, because when people are crying out, they're usually trying to get your attention. So I'm just saying, listen to the people who want you to listen to them. When there's a protest happening downtown, like we have all these sort of internalized narratives. I talked about this earlier. We know we've practiced ways of telling ourselves that, that's just those people. But like literally, I mean, I've been to so many protests in my life. There are so many things I would rather do with my time than stand on a corner and yell about something. If somebody has come to a place in their life where they are standing on a corner and yelling about something in your community, like, I think it's just like basic Christian discipleship to say, what is the concern? This is where I'm called to live and follow Jesus. Jesus said, Jesus is pretty clear about this. I will show up in people who are hungry, people who are thirsty, people who are naked, people who are sick, people who are incarcerated, basically like people who are in desperation. So if people are desperate enough about anything that they're hollering about it, let's ask them what, like, there's a way to get to know somebody. I mean, have you ever driven by a McDonald's at 6 a.m. in the morning and everybody who works on the inside is standing outside? I mean, they do that to try to get attention. And these folks, it's called the Fight for 15. They actually have gone around the country asking churches to join them when they do it. The first time they asked me, I said, well, what do you want me to do? They said, we just want a preacher to be there. I said, just stand there with you? Yeah, that's all. We just want you to be there. you don't need me to pray or speak. No, just stand there. Stand out with us. And we're going to tell our stories. We're going to talk about, you know, what life actually looks like when you make $725 an hour, when you're sexually harassed on the job, when you don't have any worker protections, when you don't have any PPE during COVID, you know, all these sort of things. So that's the kind of relationship I'm not talking about, you know, these folks becoming your best friend. Although, you know, you might meet somebody that becomes your best friend. I don't know, but I'm just saying, listening to people's reality and entering into it and letting it shape how you understand the world.
Nathan, just can I dive in on Jonathan real quickly? Jonathan, my friend John Clarkson and I were at a lecture several years ago on reparations and reconciliation. And at the end of it, in the Q&A, a Black woman sitting with us said to people, "We're not asking for you to feel sorry for us. We're not asking for an apology. All we're saying is, when you see us needing a little help and support, you don't even have to march with us. Hand out some water, stand there and just support us along the sidewalk as we're trying to get our voices heard. That's all we really would like. That's all we need. It's not complicated."
Good.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to reparations, 40 acres and a mule, you know, it's not like that's what people even demanded. It's what Sherman promised. It was written on paper. And I mean, you know, white folks don't know this history. We've never, or if we do know it, you know, we don't take it personally usually. But how, like, just think about it. How else were you going to survive as somebody who had farmed for somebody else, you know, never given the fruit of your labor, just put up, you know, often 3-4 families to a house, forced to work 6 days a week, you know, families split up, all of that. Nobody had any property, hardly, or anything to their name. So, you know, Sherman comes through and says, "We're confiscating these plantations and we're going to give each of you 40 acres and a mule so you can make it." Folks who were used to working said, "Well, we know we can make it. Give us the land. We know how to work the land. We can make it." And Johnson came back, you know, after Lincoln was shot. Johnson said, "Give the plantations back to the plantation owners. That's their property." That's why there's no 40 acres and a mule. The plantations went back to the people who had owned them. The people who had rebelled against the Union, the people who had cost so many lives, so much money, the plantations went back to them. And reparations is simply a conversation about what is required in order for a people who are generationally removed from wealth to be given full citizenship so that they can participate in a society. You don't have to have any ideology about, you know, how an economy should be structured. You can be a free market capitalist or a left-wing socialist, whatever the case you are in terms of your theory of economy. You know, even the most right-wing free market capitalists can understand that if you play Monopoly for 8 rounds and everybody's got what they've got, and then somebody shows up and says, "Hey, can I get in?" They're not going to catch up if they don't get anything when they start.
So here's something that's interesting. So my bride, who's a holy person, she went dark. There she is. So Lisa's been on this interesting project, which is to research our ancestors and did they own slaves? And the answer that we've learned is yes, some of them did, and we know their names. And we're trying to is there a way to track down the descendants of those slaves? Right, that's a scary question. So if we find so-and-so who lives wherever, what is our obligation to them, given that Lisa's ancestors owned them as slaves. And like, if every Christian in the world would do that and figure it out, that's a different way of thinking about reparations, right? It's not governmental reparations. It's what do the Howells as a family owe to, I don't know their names, but we're trying to figure out their names and we want to reach out to them and I don't know what. Yeah.
No, I think it's an important conversation to have, and I think it is certainly a faithful pursuit to look into the particularity of your own lineage and your own context. But in terms of systemic racism in this country, it's really not even about whether a particular family owned particular people, or frankly, it's not even really about whether your family was here when slavery still existed, because the system was already set up so that those immigrants who came since then were grafted on to this system and raced according to the things that were set up then. So there are lots of individuals and institutions that are having this conversation right now. I mean, any church that, let's just be honest, not that it's all liquid, but churches are some of the wealthiest institutions in, especially cities right now, where property values have gone through the roof. Churches often have a lot of property, and we have that property, we own it collectively, obviously because, people who've been part of that institution over the years have invested in it and its collective life. But, in congregations where most of those people have been white folks, it's fair to say that we need to take some responsibility for the way in which, all things being equal, our ancestors that built these buildings wouldn't have had the resources they had if they hadn't taken them from somebody else. And so, there are congregations that are talking about, what would it mean for us to have a reparations fund, for us to, be serious about investing some portion of the wealth that we have accumulated as a group in, in efforts at creating greater equality in our community.
I'm sure at a church like Myers Park, none of that exists.
None of that conversation, or none of that injustice?
I'm kidding. Our administrative board is taking a pretty wholesale look. We're starting this process at race at every level of what we do. So our vendors, the names of our rooms, everything. We're looking at that. Kate Maynard, who's our chair, is on the call tonight. And that's going to be a great process. Hard for some people, I'm sure.
Yep.
And the other thing I say to folks who are doing that, I mean, I think it's an important conversation. It's led to some beautiful and fruitful things, but it's it's not like it's you don't want it to become your tithing your mint and your cumin. You know what I'm saying? It's one thing, but in so many ways, even if you can identify some resources that you're able to either liquidate or share in some way, I think it's a critical question how you engage your neighbors in terms of what they would want you to do with it. I mean, I've seen some people go through this whole process, and then the only thing they can think to do with it is like their great idea of what the community needs. And I just think, it's all a journey. It's all a journey about sort of unlearning our need to control and be in charge, unlearning our assumption that we own everything, and yet we need to make that concrete, and we do need to have these conversations about what it means for me personally, what it means for my family, what it means for my congregation, what it means for my city, what it means for this country, and that, to the extent that those conversations are happening, I think, all the way to the to the Senate. One of our scholars who's done the best work on reparations, Sandy Darity over here at Duke, he advised Senator Cory Booker's staff, and they wrote the baby bonds bill, which has been introduced in the Senate, and is a sort of basic structural way in which we could invest as a country in building wealth for people who have been systemically excluded from wealth in this country.
Jonathan, thank you.
I make one comment.
Jonathan, if you have any final closing words or charge upon what you've offered for tonight for this group.
Nathan, I sent you a note a little before, but I'd like to make one final comment. One thing that's important, I think, is the book I'm reading now is Waking Up White. Just a thought for people, but it's a very good way to look at ourselves and how that expands into the white supremacy. But I just wanted to make sure, because I think it's a very important book. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you. I'll offer a prayer.
Yeah.
Thank you, God, for your children gathered here together in this circle. Thank you for your children everywhere and for your church, the way you've moved by your Spirit in odd and surprising and sometimes funny and peculiar ways to bring us into your story. And thank you for this circle of people who know in their journey with you that they've been called to leave the lies of whiteness behind and to embrace not only their neighbor's full humanity, but also their own full humanity in beloved community. I pray for their journey in that direction. I pray for this congregation in which they find themselves, that they can be a catalyst for expanding that movement and growing that community into your love and your mercy and your justice. I pray that they can be a light in Charlotte and salt in that community to lift these issues and to build with their neighbors the beloved community that you want to see on this earth. God, strengthen us by your Spirit. Keep us humble and keep us encouraged as we face the challenges that are real, and keep us always listening, attentive, Lord, to how you are stirring among those whose cries you've always heard and among whom you have always been present. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
Bless y'all. Good to be with you.
Bless you, brother.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for being with us. This has been recorded, and it'll be made available. It'll be in this week's e-newsletter for missions on Thursday. Share it with somebody that you might think could benefit from this. Part of the topic tonight, a lot of the topic tonight was next steps. What do you do? How do you continue the momentum going forward? Here's an incredible way. There's 29 people on here. That means that's 29 letters, phone calls, emails to City Council advocating for Brook Hill neighborhood. The City Council, Lisa, thank you so much for just putting all that information in the chat. Click that, save that. There's a gap of $13 million that city's not stepping up to close with some of the funds they have with LISC and some other groups. And that's just more of the systemicness that we need to be a part and advocate for, and to make sure that folks are getting adequate housing and affordable housing, and natural reoccurring affordable housing is right there. And there's been a hard work for past 3+ years of trying to figure out how to work with Brook Hill. And this is not Nathan White led, this is Brook Hill led. And so take the words from Jonathan as you heard tonight. We decentralize ourselves. We hear the cries. The cries are coming from South Tryon and Remount in that area.
That link didn't work. If you haven't, Oh, it's your Facebook page. Okay.
Yeah. So go to Lisa's Facebook page and go for it. Yes, Lisa. Oh,
I'm going to try another link and see if this one will work for folks.
there we go.
See if that Google Drive, or you can just go to my Facebook page, or probably Nathan's, or anybody that has a Brook Hill Matters thing on their Facebook. I bet you Ray has put the link there. So.
That's right. All right, guys, thank you so much. Stay tuned for other ways that we're going to continue this going forward. As James said, the ad board is taking a hard look. There's our Race Forwards team as well. You can reach out to John and Ron, John Clarkson, Ron Knapp, about how to get engaged there. There's many ways to continue this work. Again, reiterating what Jonathan said, it starts personally, then it's in your family, and it continues to build out in that direction. So let's build more equitable communities, starting with you. Good night, friends.
Thanks.